Did you grow up with a song about the Pharisees and the Sadducees?
What? No.
So it was something like the Pharisees were not fair, you see, and the Sadducees were sad, you see. Mm-hmm. And it reminded me of your message because the Pharisees talk about the letter of the law, and they forget about people. And the Sadducees don't believe in the resurrection.
Yeah.
And so it makes them sad. They're
Yes,
sad, you see.
Yes.
It's sad to not believe in the resurrection.
That's true. I didn't get that till college, actually. I used that to remember what the difference was on my college exams.
That's hilarious. Well, hello and welcome back to Midweek Mashup. Today I'm sitting down with Pastor Ty, who gave our message this past Sunday. There was a little Sunday switcheroo that went on. It's always fun when those happen.
I know. Eric gets a chance to hold a guitar, and I get a chance to have a microphone taped to my face.
Yep. I really enjoyed your message. We're continuing our Mark series.
Yeah.
And you covered a lot of topics on Sunday.
Yeah.
There's really a lot of background. I really like the storytelling approach that you took.
Yeah.
I also know that leading up to it, you and I talked briefly that there was a few different ways that you were thinking of taking your message. Could you tell me a little bit about that?
Yeah, well, it's one of those things where as I was preparing and talking with Pastor Eric and trying to figure out like where to go, like he's talked about, and even in some of his previous sermons in the series, he's kind of honed in on one piece of a chapter because some chapters are really long.
Yeah.
You can't spend all that time on the entire chapter. Yeah. But because this chapter was so thematically connected with Jesus versus the Sanhedrin, Jesus versus the Pharisees, the Sadducees, like all these opponents who were trying to trap him, I'm like, I'm going to have to go over this whole chapter.
Yeah.
But even still, I didn't get to go over the whole chapter because I had to skim past the Sadducees argument because it was really specific. They were a group that was against, they didn't believe in the resurrection. And so their argument was specifically pertaining to the resurrection, which I'm like, okay, that's a really specific thing that you could do a whole different sermon on because it involves resurrection. You bring in stuff from Revelation, other Gospels, the book of Hebrews, Isaiah. Like, there's a whole other thing that comes with that I'm like, I can't talk about that. Yeah. And then I also skimmed past the widow kind of at the end, where there's this big scene in the temple. Jesus goes back and forth with all these guys. They kind of fall silent. He starts calling them out on some stuff. And as he's doing that, this widow comes in doing her kind of daily practice and brings this meager, tiny little offering, financially valuable, tiny financial value, and brings this offering. And Jesus notices it, sees it, and commends her of like, oh my gosh, like, do you see the faith of this woman that she is giving all that she has, which is, again, the whole point of the chapter is the give to the Lord what is the Lord's. You bear his image, give that to God. Love him with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. The widow, the old woman's doing that. She's doing this, and Jesus sees it. And at the same, I do wonder, me and Eric talked about it a little bit, it's like all the sermons I hear on that passage are like, look at the faith demonstrated, right? Look at the faith demonstrated by this woman. But I also wonder a little bit after Jesus has just talked to the Pharisees who are so concerned with the letter of the law, following it to the dot in every I, that they miss the point of caring for people. Like this poor widow or old woman feels compelled to give her last bit of money to the temple because that's what she's been taught her entire life. And I wonder if Jesus sees that and goes, oh, that wasn't the point of that law. Was to sacrifice yourself to give to these like I called the I called the Sadducees sort of like an aristocratic vibe. Like they had like a pomp and a circumstance to them. Like these guys are rich. They're not necessarily doing like so bad for themselves.
Right.
And this poor old woman is giving her last 2 cents. And Jesus sees the dichotomy. He sees it and goes, what are we doing? And so I kind of had to leave that on its own too, because you unpack a lot there culturally, and even just like the understanding of that cultural law, that idea of like you are required to do this if you want to follow after God. You have to follow the law exactly. And Jesus, the whole point of chapter 12 was to say, y'all are missing it. You're missing the point. This is love God. You've added so much on top of this. Is love God, love others.
Yeah.
This one teacher, this unnamed guy who comes in verse 25, he gets it.
Yeah.
The rest of y'all, come on now. What are we doing?
Yeah, that's crazy. It's like the Sadducees are this wealthy class who it's probably a lot easier for them to give, let's say, 10%, which is like a typical tithing in our culture. And because their living expenses are already covered by their vast wealth, and they have plenty of room to still give 10%. But for someone like the widow, it's like much harder. That 10% probably is the difference between food on the table or not food on the table.
Yeah.
That's a really tricky thing that I think applies to our current culture.
Yeah, I think if we get caught up in the letters, we choose to zoom in on the what does this word mean? What does this word mean? What does this word mean? Like, kind of why I wanted to take it with a story approach for my message was to say, like, these words, these sentences exist in a broader narrative. And even chapter 12 exists in a broader narrative. Like, we added the chapters and the verse numbers later. We should be reading Mark as a whole kind of like book. Like, it's a continual story. Mark 12 is not existing in a vacuum. That's why I kind of did like a little bit of a reminder on what was the last chapter? What was Mark 11? Because it's important.
Yeah.
Because if you just start in Mark 12, it's like Jesus is fighting with some guys in power for some reason. I'm not sure what's happening.
Yeah.
He's been going around healing people, and he's got a huge crowd following him. And they just did this huge public display. The previous chapter, like a couple days ago, real time, they just had a whole crowd of people out front to celebrate him, even though he was trying to be a symbol of peace. Comes in riding on the donkey. They still are expecting him to be victorious. So then from the outskirts of that celebration, on the outside of Mark 11, you've got all these religious elders watching this. You've got these the Herodians, who are Roman supporters, watching this military-esque parade happen. This group of people coming in celebrated with palms and cloaks, which was a symbol of victory back in the day. Freaking out, probably.
Yeah.
Like, we don't get to hear what their reaction is.
Oh man, another revolution is on the way.
Yeah, the hundreds of years between the Old Testament and the New Testament, there's a pretty big rebellion that gets quelled, but it's still something that people remember when we start the New Testament. It's still something that people remember and go, oh, we were almost there. That was hope. We were so close. That's what could have been.
Yeah. And
then Jesus comes around and go, all right, here we go.
Yeah.
We've got it this time. So the Herodians are watching this going, oh no, here's part two. We got to let people know. And then the Pharisees and the Sanhedrin are watching the Herodians think that and going, oh no, we got to stop this before things get out of hand again, because we like our cushy power situation right now. We don't need things shaken up. We want to stay where we are. We want to stay kind of prim and proper. We don't need a rebellion.
Yeah, and especially Rome doesn't want any more rebellions, and so the Pharisees are like, we're going to get in trouble if there's a rebellion.
Yeah, guilt by association from Big Brother Rome, right? And so all of that comes into Mark 12, and then I ended my sermon with something that you and I had actually talked about as I was preparing, is like, from here, it's all headed toward the crucifixion. We're all headed to Good Friday and Easter. And Mark 12 is a really key piece of that story, because it even says so after he spars with the religious elders, the Sanhedrin, the first time. That's when they decide, all right, we're going to have to arrest this guy, because things are going to get out of hand if we don't get ahead of this. And so they realize they're in a state of like, all right, everyone here is starting to agree with him, so we can't do this now, but we're gonna make this happen. This is something that we're gonna start thinking about, and we're gonna scoop back for now. But Mark 12 is where the plot hatches. That's where things start, the gears start turning. For Good Friday.
Wow.
And so even it doesn't exist in a vacuum for the rest of the book. Like, there's setup to why Mark 12 happens. and then Mark 12 is the setup for Holy Week, essentially.
Wow. Mm-hmm.
And so it was really important to me as as I was trying to teach and give the storybook kind of telling of it, to like continue on that tradition of like, we do this with kids. We want to tell the story of Palm Sunday in Sunday school or FCC Kids or wherever, right? I've heard that story growing up in church a lot. You give the kids the palm branches, it's adorable.
Yeah.
But the storytelling continues after that too. And like I even mentioned it in my sermon, it's like, a lot of the gospel stories are Jesus standing in one place and talking. Yeah. But it's important to like think about the characters as well. Think about the reactions of the people as he's saying these things. Yeah. A lot of times the Bible will say something like, and the disciples were confused, or they were amazed, or like, and that's, well, why? Like we can kind of skim past that real quick. It was like, well, of course they were confused. They were not super smart. But why were they confused? Yeah. It's because Jesus was teaching a radical lesson most of the time of like, you should love your neighbor even if they are your enemy. The parable I referenced was the parable of the Good Samaritan, which was a cultural intense parable because a Samaritan and a Jewish person did not get along, but the Samaritan is the one who was helping. The Samaritan is the one who was loving their neighbor well. Yeah. So as Jesus tells that parable, the disciples get confused because they're like, why would a Samaritan wouldn't help us? What are you talking about? Why would you say it this way? Yeah. It's because he's trying to make a point. Right. That's what you should be doing. You should be loving your neighbor in the same way, even if they don't like you, you don't like them. Even if you don't agree on everything or anything. Yeah. We're called to love God and love our neighbor in the same sentence. And that's important. Like that's important. And so it was a really fun message to write and get to tell, but it was also like, there's a lot of like cultural things here that I'm going to have to kind of just hope we've taught and kind of hope read at home. I said that at the front of the message is like read Mark 11 on your own. Like read it all as one story, one progression of events, and it can change your perspective on Holy Week and Easter and Good Friday.
That's really cool. It's like sometimes on iPhones you take a bunch of screenshots of something that you like, or sometimes you're able to take that really long screenshot that you just like keep scrolling and scrolling and scrolling. And that's kind of more so how people read what we call the Bible today. We kind of read it as a bunch of screenshots and we kind of skip through. But there's a lot of great stuff between Palm Sunday and Good Friday that I think kind of gets brushed off as just like, more Jesus stuff. Yeah. And it's actually really, really good. So I really appreciate you sitting down and sharing a little bit more. If you want to hear that message from Pastor Ty, I'll add a banner to it. And if you want to hear more from us here at FCC, we have another video for you right here.